The silver skies of orbital Academy Thiessen shimmered faintly with an iridescent glow, as though the station itself pulsed with life. This was the pinnacle of intergalactic military education, a hub where the brightest minds from hundreds of species honed their skills in strategy, combat, and survival. For years, cadets of countless alien races had walked its halls, their talents sharpened to serve their respective fleets. Among these prodigies stood Jaren Holt, the Academy's first human recruit, and by most accounts, its weakest. Jaren trudged through the central promenade, his brown hair slightly disheveled, his standard-issue blue uniform pristine but unremarkable. Around him, alien cadets of various sizes, shapes, and hues barely concealed their amusement. It wasn't hard to see why. Humans, despite their recent entry into the galactic community, were regarded as laughably inferior, a soft-bodied species with no remarkable physical prowess or natural defenses. Careful, Holt sneered Kale Vren, a towering Crexian cadet with a body covered in jagged, chitinous plating. Wouldn't want you to sprain an ankle before the tactical drills. A ripple of laughter passed through the group of alien cadets gathered nearby. Jaren gave a small, resigned smile and kept walking. He'd heard worse during his first few weeks, and he doubted this would be the last time someone targeted him. As Jaren approached the simulation chamber, a new voice cut through the din. "You should save your mockery, Kale. I hear humans compensate for their weaknesses with unparalleled cleverness. Maybe Jaren's secretly a tactical genius, waiting to spring his trap." The sarcasm belonged to North Gill, a slender Aeric with skin that shimmered like liquid gold. The group's laughter grew louder as North dramatically mimed an exaggerated, pensive look, as though calculating a strategy. "Maybe we'll see that genius in the upcoming Fleet Tactics tournament," Kale said, smirking. "Assuming he doesn't get eliminated in the first round." Jaren paused but said nothing. He wasn't here to argue with them. His goal was simple: survive the Academy, prove humanity's worth, and pave the way for future recruits. He didn't need their approval, he just needed to focus. As the cadets filed into the simulation chamber, Jaren took a seat near the back, his attention fixed on the massive holoscreen at the front. The Academy's head instructor, Commander Zevran, loomed in the center of the room. A Valthar, Zevran's silver-gray skin and elongated limbs gave him an imposing presence, his eyes glinting with a predatory sharpness. "Cadets," Zevran began, his deep voice echoing through the chamber. "The Fleet Tactics tournament begins in 3 days. You'll compete in teams to simulate real combat scenarios, and the victors will earn high commendations. As always, the Academy's top strategist, Cadet Vorinkeks, will oversee the final challenge." A collective murmur of excitement swept through the room. Vorinkeks, a brilliant Exovian cadet with an unmatched record in tactical simulations, was a living legend among the cadets. His azure skin and bioluminescent markings gave him an ethereal quality, but it was his mind that truly set him apart. No one had ever outmaneuvered Vorin, not once. Jaren's stomach tightened. The thought of competing in a tournament where Vorin dictated the terms was daunting. But as Zevran's gaze swept across the room, landing briefly on him, Jaren straightened his back. This was what he had trained for. "Prepare yourselves," Zevran concluded. Dismissed. As the cadets spilled into the corridor, Jaren found himself cornered by Kale and North again. "You should just withdraw now," North said with a grin. "Save yourself the humiliation." Or Kale added, leaning closer, "You could stick around for the entertainment value. Watching you fumble through the tournament might be the highlight of my week." Jaren met Kale's gaze, his voice steady. "Guess you'll just have to wait and see." The remark earned a few surprised chuckles from passing cadets. Kale frowned but said nothing as Jaren walked away. The days leading up to the tournament were a blur of preparation. Jaren spent long hours studying past simulations, memorizing fleet configurations, and practicing maneuvers in the Academy's tactical lab. He knew he couldn't match the raw strength or speed of his peers, but he had one advantage: humanity's unique way of thinking. Where other species often relied on linear logic or instinctual tactics, humans excelled at improvisation, adapting to the unexpected and turning weaknesses into strengths. The first round of the tournament arrived faster than Jaren expected. Teams were assigned randomly, and Jaren found himself paired with 3 cadets he barely knew: Thalix, a hulking Kraxer with 6 muscular arms Nira, a sharp-eyed Yendrin with a keen sense for battlefield analysis and finer, a jittery Zorithian with a knack for electronic warfare. None of them seemed particularly thrilled to have Jaren on their team, but there was no time for introductions. Their first challenge was a simulated asteroid field ambush. The goal was to navigate through the field, avoid enemy fire, and disable a hidden pirate base. Thalix immediately took charge, barking orders as the team scrambled to coordinate. "Stay in formation," Thalix growled, his deep voice rumbling through the comms. "Nira, plot a safe course. Finar, jam their sensors. Holt, just try not to crash into anything." Jaren bit back a retort and focused on his role as helmsman. The simulation was chaotic, with debris hurtling past and enemy ships darting in and out of cover. Despite Thalix's rigid instructions, their formation quickly fell apart under the relentless assault. "Focus fire on the lead ship," Thalix roared, but the enemy fleet was already shifting tactics, outflanking them with ease. Jaren's mind raced. Their current strategy wasn't working, and sticking to it would only lead to failure. Glancing at the controls, he made a snap decision. Without waiting for approval, he veered the ship sharply to the right, weaving through the asteroid field and drawing enemy fire away from the rest of the team. "What are you doing?" Thalix shouted. "You're breaking formation." "Trust me," Jaren replied, his voice calm. "Just follow my lead." Against all odds, his gamble paid off. By exploiting the terrain and forcing the enemy into a narrow choke point, Jaren turned the tide of the battle. The team disabled the pirate base with seconds to spare, emerging victorious. As the simulation ended, Thalix turned to Jaren, his expression a mix of disbelief and grudging respect. "Not bad, Holt. Not bad at all." Word of Jaren's unexpected success spread quickly, but the ridicule didn't stop. If anything, it intensified. "Beginner's luck," North said with a smirk. "Let's see how long that lasts." The next few rounds tested Jaren's limits. Each challenge brought new obstacles: a planetary siege, a rescue mission in hostile territory, a high-speed pursuit through a nebula. Time and again, Jaren found himself at odds with his teammates, forced to defy conventional wisdom to achieve victory. His unorthodox tactics often drew criticism, but the results spoke for themselves. By the time the final round arrived, Jaren's team had earned a place among the top contenders. The only thing standing between them and victory was Vorin Kex. As the cadets gathered in the grand simulation hall, the air buzzed with anticipation. "You've done well to get this far," Vorin said, his tone devoid of malice but brimming with confidence. "But this is where your luck runs out." Jaren met Vorin's gaze, his heart pounding. "We'll see about that." The final simulation chamber was unlike anything Jaren had seen before. The holographic projection sprawled out in 3 dimensions, a vast battlefield stretching across simulated space. Fleet formations flickered into view, their sheer scale intimidating. Each team was assigned a single capital ship, supported by smaller vessels, while Vorin Kex had command of a massive armada. Jaren stood with his team Thalix, Nira, and Finar on their command deck. The tension was palpable. Nira reviewed the tactical displays with sharp precision, Thalix cracked his knuckles, and Finar nervously adjusted the settings on his console. Jaren, meanwhile, studied the battlefield with quiet intensity. Commander Zevran's voice boomed over the comms. "This final simulation replicates an open space engagement. Victory is achieved by neutralizing the opposing fleet's command structure or securing the central starbase. Begin." The simulation erupted into chaos. Ships darted forward in sweeping formations, beams of light streaking across the void. Vorin's armada moved like a single entity, an elegant and deadly machine. His reputation as a strategist wasn't just hype, he was several moves ahead from the outset, forcing other teams into predictable patterns. Jaren's team had barely moved when Thalix began barking orders. "Keep us in defensive formation. Finar, strengthen the shields. Nira, watch for flanking maneuvers." "We'll be boxed in if we stay here," Jaren said, his voice cutting through the noise. "We need to move." Thalix glared at him. "And charge into their guns? Are you trying to get us obliterated?" Jaren ignored the accusation and tapped into the console, projecting a simulation of their current predicament. "Look at the patterns. Vorin's forcing everyone into a predictable response. If we follow the same tactics, we're done. But if we break formation and go for the central starbase, we'll catch him off guard. Nira frowned. The starbase is heavily defended. Even if we get close, we'll be overwhelmed. Not if we trick him into thinking we're retreating, Jaren said, his mind racing. We'll make it look like we're disengaging to regroup. While his fleet shifts to counter us, we'll loop around and hit the starbase. Risky, Finar muttered, his fingers hovering nervously over the controls. But it could work. Thalix grumbled but relented. Fine, but if this goes wrong, it's on you. Jaren nodded and took the helm. Finar, prep the engines for a burst. Nira, time their firing patterns, find us a gap. Thalix, hold your fire until I give the signal. The team executed the maneuver with precision. Their capital ship veered sharply, breaking away from the main cluster of combatants. Vorin's fleet adjusted almost immediately, his ships closing in like predators sensing weakness. Keep the angle steady, Jaren said. Wait for them to commit. The tension was suffocating as Vorin's ships bore down on them. Then, at the last possible moment, Jaren spun the ship into a tight arc, cutting through the edge of a nebula. The move bought them precious seconds as Vorin's formation hesitated, recalculating. We're clear, Nira shouted. Heading for the starbase now. The starbase loomed ahead, its defenses bristling with turrets and interceptor drones. Jaren's mind worked furiously, analyzing the layout. He noticed a weak point, an exposed power relay hidden near the rear. Finar, jam their targeting systems. Nira, lock onto the power relay. Thalix, give me covering fire. The team sprang into action. Thalix unleashed a barrage of firepower, drawing the starbase's defenses. Nira pinpointed the weak spot, and Finar's electronic interference left the drone scrambling. Jaren piloted the ship with nerve-wracking precision, dodging incoming fire and positioning them for the perfect shot. Fire, Jaren ordered. The ship's main cannon unleashed a blinding beam of energy, striking the power relay. The starbase's defenses flickered, then went dark. A cheer erupted from the team, but their victory was short-lived. Vorin's fleet is on an intercept course, Nira warned. Jaren clenched his fists. Vorin had seen through their ruse and was already regrouping. Their ship was outnumbered, and the starbase was only partially disabled. Retreat wasn't an option, not if they wanted to win. Options, Thalix growled, his voice tinged with desperation. Jaren stared at the tactical display, his mind racing. They couldn't win a direct confrontation, but perhaps they didn't need to. Vorin's confidence in his superiority was a double-edged sword, a trait Jaren could exploit. We're going to bait him, Jaren said, a grin forming. Finar rigged the starbase's core to overload. Make it look like we're trying to take control. Nira, feed false data into their sensors, make it seem like reinforcements are en route. Thalix, I need you to sell this. Fire everything we've got, but don't hit anything important. You're insane, Thalix muttered, but he complied. As the team executed the plan, Vorin's fleet approached cautiously, his ships maintaining a tight formation. Jaren's heart pounded as he watched the display. If Vorin caught on too soon, they were finished. Come on, Jaren whispered. Take the bait. Finally, Vorin's fleet broke formation, splitting into smaller groups to encircle the starbase. It was the opening Jaren needed. Now, full retreat head for the asteroid belt. The team's ships surged forward, leaving the starbase behind. Moments later, the overloaded core detonated, engulfing Vorin's forces in a wave of energy. The blast didn't destroy his fleet, but it created enough chaos for Jaren's team to escape. The simulation ended abruptly, the holographic battlefield dissolving into static. Commander Zevran's voice rang out, calm but unmistakably impressed. Simulation complete. Victory, Team Alpha. The chamber fell silent. Jaren's team had won. Vorin Kex approached Jaren, his expression unreadable. For a moment, Jaren braced for an insult or a dismissive remark. Instead, Vorin extended a hand. Well played, he said. I underestimated you. Jaren shook his hand, a mix of relief and pride swelling in his chest. Thanks. You're not so bad yourself. Around them, cadets whispered in disbelief. the human mocked and dismissed as weak, had outsmarted the Academy's top strategist. For the first time, Jaren felt he'd earned more than just their grudging respect, he'd earned their recognition. The victory in the final simulation spread through the Academy like wildfire. Cadets from all species replayed the match in the holotheaters, dissecting every moment of the battle, from Jaren's daring maneuvers to Voron's uncharacteristic mistakes. The once dismissive whispers that had followed Jaren through the halls were replaced by cautious nods and speculative glances. Some saw him as an anomaly, others as a fluke. A few began to wonder if humanity's unconventional methods might be worth studying. For Jaren, the aftermath of the tournament was surreal. He'd spent weeks being ignored or ridiculed, and now everyone seemed to have an opinion about him. Nira, Thalix, and Finer congratulated him with varying degrees of sincerity. Thalix even gave him a gruff pat on the back, muttering something about unexpectedly decent leadership. Still, Jaren knew better than to let the victory go to his head. There was always another challenge, another test of skill waiting just around the corner. 1 week later, Jaren found himself summoned to the Central Strategy Chamber, a high-security area reserved for the Academy's most critical operations. The chamber was a vast, circular room filled with holographic projections of star systems, fleet formations, and intelligence reports. Commander Zevran stood at the center, flanked by instructors and senior cadets, including Voron Kex. Cadet Holt Zevran said as Jaren approached, "Your performance in the Fleet Tactics tournament has raised some intriguing possibilities." Jaren stopped at attention, unsure where this was going. "Sir." Zevran gestured to the holographic display, which shifted to reveal a star system near the edge of the Galactic Coalition's territory. "This is the Maelstrom Cluster. Intelligence reports indicate unusual activity in this region, rogue fleets operating under unknown command." Jaren's brow furrowed. "Rogue fleets? Are they pirates?" Unlikely, Voron interjected, his tone measured. "Their movements are too coordinated. This suggests a higher level of organization, possibly a rival power testing our borders." Zevran nodded. "The Coalition needs more information before committing military assets to the region. This will require a reconnaissance mission, one that demands discretion, adaptability, and unconventional tactics." Jaren began to piece it together. "And you're sending cadets?" Zevran's expression didn't change, but his gaze sharpened. "A small team of cadets, yes. You will operate under the guise of an advanced simulation exercise. The Academy's reputation and your species' eyes will be on the line." Jaren's stomach flipped. "My team." Zevran nodded. "You'll have Nira, Thalix, and Finer again. We believe your success in the tournament was not a fluke. Voron Kex will also join you as an advisor." That last part surprised Jaren. He glanced at Voron, who gave him a small, inscrutable nod. It was hard to tell if the Exovian saw this as an opportunity for redemption or a way to reassert his dominance. Either way, Jaren didn't have much choice. "When do we leave?" Jaren asked. Immediately, Zevran replied, "Your ship is already prepped." The mission began smoothly enough. Their vessel, the Resolute, was equipped with stealth systems, advanced sensors, and a modest arsenal. As they approached the Maelstrom cluster, Jaren found himself seated in the command chair with Voron standing just behind him. The tension between them was palpable, though they both made an effort to stay professional. Approaching the cluster, Nira reported from her station. "Long-range scans are picking up debris fields and faint energy signatures." "Pirate leftovers," Thalix rumbled. Jaren studied the readouts. "Could be. Or it could be bait. Let's move in cautiously. Finar, keep the stealth field at maximum." The Resolute glided into the cluster, its sleek hull blending seamlessly with the swirling gases and drifting wreckage. As they delved deeper, the energy signatures grew stronger, resolving into distinct shapes. "Contacts," Nira said, her voice tight. "Multiple ships, 3 cruisers, 2 frigates, and a carrier. They're idling near a derelict station." Voron leaned over Jaren's shoulder, his glowing markings faintly illuminating the console. "Their formation is unusual, defensive but not aggressive, almost as if they're waiting for something." Jaren nodded. "Could be reinforcements or a cargo transfer. Either way, we need to stay hidden. Nira, can you pinpoint the station's comms array? Got it, she said. It's broadcasting on a tight beam encrypted. Finar, think you can slice into it? Jaren asked. Finar's mandibles clicked nervously. I can try, but if they detect us. They won't, Jaren said, his tone steady. You've got this. The Zorithian nodded and set to work. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours as Finar painstakingly worked through the encryption. Finally, he let out a triumphant chirp. I'm in. But this is odd. The comms are relaying orders from a remote source coordinates point outside the cluster. Jaren frowned. Forward the data to Nira. Let's see what we're dealing with. As Nira brought up the intercepted orders, her eyes widened. This isn't a rogue fleet. They're mercenaries, and they're working for. She froze, her voice trailing off. For whom Thalix demanded. Nira looked up, her expression grim. A Kulthar warlord. These fleets are staging an incursion into coalition space. The room fell silent. The Kilthar were a reclusive and highly aggressive species, known for their brutal conquests on the galactic fringes. If they were organizing an invasion, the coalition needed to act immediately. We have to report this, Jaren said. Vorin, what's your take? Vorin's expression was unreadable, his glowing eyes fixed on the display. We should gather more intel before we retreat. If we leave now, we risk losing the element of surprise. And if we stay, we risk getting caught. Thalix countered. Jaren weighed the options. Finally, he made his decision. We'll take a closer look. Nira, plot a course around the fleet. Finar, keep the stealth field tight. Thalix, prep the weapons just in case. As the Resolute slipped past the mercenary ships, Jaren couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The fleet's positioning, the encrypted orders, the derelict station, it all felt too convenient, as if they were being lured into a trap. Something's wrong, Jaren said, his eyes scanning the displays. Vorin, thoughts. Jaren hesitated, then nodded. I feel it too. They're baiting us. But why? Before Jaren could answer, an alarm blared. Stealth field breached. Finar shouted. They've locked onto us. The mercenary fleet began to move, their weapons powering up. Jaren's team scrambled to react, and the ship shuddered as enemy fire grazed the shields. Evasive maneuvers, Jaren barked. Nira, find us an escape route. Thalix, return fire, target their engines. As chaos erupted on the Resolute, Jaren realized they were in for more than a simple reconnaissance mission. The Kilthar weren't just testing the coalition, they were testing him. The Resolute danced through the void, narrowly dodging a barrage of incoming fire. The mercenary fleet was relentless, their ships closing in like a pack of hunting predators. Inside the command deck, the air was electric with tension, punctuated by the occasional grunt from Thalix or a frantic chirp from Finar. They're boxing us in, Nira shouted. We've got incoming from 3 vectors, no way out. Jaren's mind raced as he studied the holographic display. The mercenary ships were too fast and coordinated for a straightforward escape. Their movements weren't random, they were following a precise pattern, one meant to drive the Resolute into a kill zone. Thalix, divert power from secondary systems to the shields, Jaren ordered. Nira, I need their pursuit routes mapped. Finar, scramble their targeting, feed them false telemetry. Vorin stepped forward, his gaze fixed on the display. It won't hold them for long. They're adjusting faster than we can react. Jaren glanced at him, then back at the map. That's because they think they've already won. They're not expecting us to do something. Irrational. Thalix growled. Define irrational. Jaren pointed at a dense cluster of debris on the edge of the battlefield. We're heading straight for that. The team froze. The debris field was a chaotic mess of twisted metal and jagged asteroids, an area that would tear their ship apart if they weren't careful. You're insane, Nira said, her voice tinged with disbelief. That's suicide. No, Jaren countered, his tone firm. It's strategy. They'll assume we're desperate and follow us in, but with their larger ships they won't maneuver as well. We'll use the terrain to even the odds. Vorin tilted his head, a faint smirk tugging at his lips. It's bold, risky. I like it. Thalix snorted. Of course you do. Without further debate, Jaren pushed the Resolute into a sharp dive, plunging toward the debris field. The mercenary fleet hesitated for only a moment before pursuing, their smaller ships surging ahead to cut off any escape. As the Resolute weaved through the field, the ship's hull groaned under the strain. Shards of metal and rock scraped against the shields, sending sparks flying. Thalix gripped his console, his eyes narrowing as he unleashed controlled bursts of fire to clear a path. Watch your angles, Nira called out. There's a spike in gravimetric instability. This whole field is one bad collision away from collapsing. That's exactly what we're counting on, Jaren said, his focus razor sharp. Finar, can we amplify the instability? The Zorithian's mandibles clicked nervously. Maybe, but it's risky. One miscalculation, and we'll be caught in the collapse too. Do it, Jaren said. Use our ship's emitter array to direct a controlled pulse. Target the densest clusters, force the field to collapse behind us. Finar hesitated, then nodded, his claws flying across the console. Moments later, the Resolute emitted a low-frequency pulse, sending ripples through the debris field. Chunks of metal and rock began to shift, grinding against each other as the field destabilized. Pulse active, Finar reported. The field's collapsing. Behind them, the mercenary ships faltered. The larger vessels struggled to navigate the shifting terrain, and several smaller craft were caught in the cascading destruction, their hulls shredded by the debris. Now's our chance, Jaren said. Nira, plot an exit vector. Thalix, keep their fire off us as we break through. The Resolute surged forward, skimming the edge of the collapsing field. Alarms blared as a massive chunk of twisted metal hurtled toward them, but Jaren twisted the controls, narrowly avoiding the collision. We're clear, Nira shouted as the ship burst out of the debris field. Behind them, the mercenary fleet was in disarray, their ranks thinned by the collapse. But the celebration was short-lived. A sudden alert flashed across the console. New contact, Finar yelled. Large signature bigger than anything we've seen so far. Jaren's heart sank as the display lit up with a new arrival, a massive Kilthar dreadnought emerging from hyperspace. Its sleek, black hull bristled with weaponry, and its engines pulsed with a menacing red glow. Guess we found the command ship, Thalix muttered. Vorin stepped closer, his eyes narrowing. They were waiting for this. The mercenaries were a distraction to draw us in. Jaren clenched his fists. Then we'll make sure this trip was worth it. The dreadnought began charging its main weapon, a colossal energy cannon capable of obliterating the Resolute in a single shot. Time was running out, and retreat wasn't an option. The Kilthar needed to know that humanity and the Coalition wouldn't back down. Nira, what's the dreadnought's weak point? Jaren asked. She scanned the data frantically. The energy cannon's core is vulnerable during the charging sequence, but we'd have to get close, dangerously close. Jaren nodded. We'll distract them. Thalix, prep our torpedoes. Finar, ready the stealth field for one last burst. Vorin, I'll need your input to time this perfectly. Vorin's glowing markings brightened, a sign of his intense focus. Understood. Let's make it count. The Resolute darted toward the dreadnought, weaving through its barrage of defensive fire. Finar activated the stealth field just as the ship reached the dreadnought's firing range, momentarily masking their position. Thalix, fire torpedoes full spread, Jaren ordered. The torpedoes streaked toward the dreadnought, slamming into its shields and creating a blinding explosion. The distraction gave the Resolute a critical opening. Now, Vorin shouted. Jaren pushed the ship into a steep dive, bringing them perilously close to the dreadnought's hull. Nira locked onto the energy cannon's core, and Thalix unleashed the final volley of torpedoes. The impact was immediate and devastating, the cannon erupting in a fiery explosion that rippled through the dreadnought. The Kulthar ship shuddered violently, its systems failing as secondary explosions tore through its structure. Jaren pulled the Resolute away just as the dreadnought's engines detonated, leaving behind a brilliant cascade of light and debris. The command deck was silent for a moment, the team processing what they had just accomplished. Then Thalix let out a booming laugh, his voice filled with exhilaration. You did it, Holt, he said. We all did. Vorin nodded, a rare smile gracing his usually stoic features. An unconventional plan, executed flawlessly. You've earned this victory. Jaren exhaled, his shoulders relaxing for the first time in hours. The mission had been harrowing, but they had succeeded and humanity had proven its place among the stars. As the Resolute prepared to return to the academy, Jaren looked at his team, a newfound sense of camaraderie settling over them. They weren't just cadets anymore. They were a unit, forged in the crucible of battle.